But you never know that you could. And when you feel that way, ain't it good, good dancing in the red and gold. Dancing in the red and gold.
What up, faithful? Welcome to the 49er Faithful UK Live. As always, I'm your host, Paul Hope, and you might recognise today's guest, somebody that I talk a lot about on this show. It is, of course, the SF Niners. Brad Green is in the house.
Paul, I'm so glad that we were finally able to get this taken care of. It's kind of hard to get me down and get me onto a show, but we finally got it, and I'm really excited. And it's so cool seeing everything you do for all the UK faithful, and I'm excited to bring this little crossover together and kind of talk a little bit more 49ers football with you.
Well, thank you for coming on, Brad. I know this week you didn't retain the title. I'm going to mention the Media Madness because I made it this year, Brad. I was in the tournament. So awesome. I lost out by 38 votes to Chase Senior. And to be fair to Chase, he did send me a very gracious message. I think he had no idea who I was. But as you've just said there, the UK faithful, given the marketing rights that the Niners were given back in 2022, the Niners have been very heavy in promoting the 49er Faithful UK. We were just talking off air about Frank Gore coming across to London last year and the fact that we were all over the NFL broadcast. So as an American, Brad, you're talking to an Englishman about NFL. That must feel a bit strange.
I wouldn't say it's super strange. I mean, I think about like when, maybe before a game or certain things, I'll be like, where are you guys watching from? Right. And it's amazing to see, like, you would think, oh, like San Jose, Santa Clara, maybe in the Bay Area, maybe in California. No, you get people checking in from all over the world, and it's remarkable. So, I don't think it's too crazy at all. And I think it's, again, just speaks to the 49ers brand and just how passionate fans really are. And it's not just local to the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, it's not nationwide, it's worldwide. And again, everything that you're doing in the UK, representing the brand, continuing to build those platforms and, community, right? Because that's really what football is for a lot of fans, is to be able to be in a situation with a lot of like-minded individuals and be able to root for, the same interest. And it doesn't matter where you've come from, your backgrounds, anything like that. You're united by the 49ers. And so it's super cool. I think it was one of the things that I wasn't really expecting when I started doing content, but man, the amount of messages I get from people overseas, like you had mentioned, there's not really football coverage like in your guys' areas. So if you're a football fan, you have to seek out certain coverage. So I get so many messages from people like, man, you really help me like love the 49ers more because, we don't get that access out here. So the content that you post helps me feel more connected to the team. And that's super cool. Like that's really one of the best compliments I could ever get from anyone.
So I know when you do your shows, you put our comments on there. You always shout out the UK faithful. It was interesting for me this week to see you talking about your journey. So you reached the final against Crocker, and you were talking about when you started, he was one of those people you looked up to. And right. At the risk of embarrassing, you are, to me, that person. So the 49er Faithful UK in the house who'll be listening. So my good friend Lee Gowland, who's on holiday this week, and he's entrusted me with the channel. He started our podcast a fair few years ago, Brad. And the podcast used to be audio only. It was a game preview and it was a game review for the UK faithful. And then a few years ago, I started dipping my toe into the YouTube stuff. Obviously, yourself, Jason Aponte were kind of my go-to. And I'd watched the SF Niners and I turned to my other half, Tracy, as I said to you off air, long suffering. And it was always my aim one day to do a show with yourself. And as you said, the stars have aligned, the messages back and forward, different times of the night. And I do really appreciate you jumping on. So I just wanted to say thank you before we dived into all the off-season talk, because as always, Brad, there's always stuff to talk about with the 49ers.
There's always something to talk about, but again, man, you have, and of course the rest of the UK faithful group have been such a great support to me and everything that I do. I always see you guys in the chat, great energy always, and I appreciate it. I really, really do. So I'm excited that we could finally get on this stream and talk some 49ers football, man.
So we did our live show on Wednesday and we titled it The State of the Franchise. And we had a look at the 49ers roster needs. Now, I'm the first to admit college football isn't my strength. And I'll explain why. It's on a Saturday evening in the UK. So because NFL Sunday for us start at 6 p.m, the Niners being a West Coast team, the games tend to be 9 p.m. or 1 in the morning. So you've referenced that sometimes you're like, you crazy Brits are up at 3, 4 in the morning watching the 49ers play. And that is the joy of supporting a West Coast team. So when it comes to college football, Brad, I tend not to watch a lot of it live. But when we get to now, that's when I'm plugged in. And I said to you off air, I remember last year, you and Larry were doing a show about offensive linemen and arm length and different prospects. And my 2 teenage daughters just left me to it. They were like, Dad, walking out of the room. And the passion for all things 49ers is encompassed in our house. They just know to leave me alone. As I've said, we don't get the wall-to-wall coverage that you guys get in the States, so we have to go and look for that. So there's a lot of talk about pick number 11. Obviously, I know how you're thinking at the moment, but given that you're on our channel, I keep flipping between an offensive pick and a defensive pick. So where are you at as it stands right now today?
I mean, it comes down to who's available, obviously. And, when it comes to offense or defense, I think offensively or defensively, you would love to see the 49ers build through the trenches. I mean, that I'm obviously big into offensive line and defensive line and that whole process. And, it really was one of my biggest concerns heading into last season when the 49ers cut Eric Armstead. We know the reasons. It was monetarily related. And so you lose Eric Armstead, who has been a staple on that defensive front for a long time. And then you have Javon Hargrave, who they spent big money on in free agency. They go and trade a 7th round pick for Malik Collins. And it's like, all right, well, this is going to be our starting defensive front. We bring in Leonard Floyd in free agency, Yetur Gross-Matos, Jordan Elliott. And that whole offseason, I was just like, I don't feel this defensive line. Now, that can change really quickly. We can get into training camp, and they look better in training camp. I'll give them credit for it, and it kind of made me feel better. But as the season progressed, I mean, they were ranked in the bottom of the league in run defense in almost every major statistical category. And obviously Hargrave getting hurt, and then just everyone felt like they got hurt on that 49ers defense at one point or another. And it just felt like defensive line needs to be at the forefront of I would say maybe the thought process at pick 11. Now, like I said, that can change based on who's available. If Armand Membo is available, if Will Campbell is available, those are 2 offensive players that I would think long and hard about drafting at that spot, because both of them, in my opinion, have guard versatility. The 49ers have at least 1 year remaining of Colton McKivitz. I don't think that you move Colton McKivitz unless you feel it benefits the rookie that you draft on the offensive line the best, because the beautiful thing about Colton is he has a ton of versatility. He can definitely play left guard and plug in and go right away. I don't think he would want to do that. I think he wants to stay at tackle. But if you took a Campbell or a Membo, they could definitely play and start at left guard and then eventually probably shift out to tackle. Membo's a right tackle. Campbell's been predominantly a left tackle, so maybe he could be a left tackle of the future. But back to the original conversation, it's like it feels like their defensive line, and you look at what they done in free agency, they let more players go in free agency than they brought in. So it really does feel like defensive line at pick 11 might be the choice. But it's a weird draft, right? Because
Yeah.
you have like your locked in top 9, top 10 guys. And of course, the 49ers sitting right there at 11. And there's no guarantee that any of those guys are going to drop down. So they could be in a prime trade back scenario. This is one of the more, when I think back to past 49ers drafts, when you talk about options, it feels like the 49ers have a lot of options at their disposal, and it's going to be fascinating to see what they do with it.
Yeah, so I did a mock draft yesterday, being one of the 4 UK faithful. We get asked to jump on and represent the 49ers, and Will Campbell went at number 3 in the mock draft I did yesterday. And I was thinking like you, I was like, man, so I've got Will Campbell on one hand. Now, I know Derek Harmon at 11 is a bit of a reach, but at the moment, that's who I tend to be sticking to when I'm kind of being asked to be the GM for the 49ers on this side of the pond. And it's just like what you said there. Under John and Kyle, we've been spoilt with how strong our defensive line was up until last year. And the fact that Collins has gone, Floyd has gone, and you said all those free agents have kind of departed. And a few of the faithful have got worried, Brad, because we've been used to, as you said, Hargrave coming in, Jed opening up the checkbook. Now, I'm known for being one of the more positive content creators, so I'm not panicking at the moment, but I'll be waiting to see what you guys do at training camp, because with me being 5,000 miles away, I have to plug into what you guys are doing, and I have all those notifications switched on. And when you go live from training camp, last year was the first time I was a little bit nervous because you yourself were saying the vibes were off, whether it was the Super Bowl hangover, whether it was the Ayuk contract talks. And I was thinking, okay, the year before you were quite hyped after training camp. So
I'm also a very optimistic, positive creator. So if I'm throwing up red flags, it's like, oh.
So, I mean, the defensive line, so Johnny Dell, who's a good friend of the show, we had him on to do some game tape breakdown. He's put there that so many of the defensive line guys have questions. Top talent has off the field questions. Top athletes have production questions. But isn't it strange? I think this is the first draft that every team has its own first round pick. And nobody seems to be discussing trading up, where the last few years there's been a lot of talk about teams moving up and down. Can you see anybody making a big splash? Like, can you see the Niners jumping up to get someone, or do you think we're quite happy sat at 11?
I feel like I would be shocked to see the 49ers move up because they're currently heading into this draft with 11 picks. And this is the first time under the Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch era that I really have noticed massive holes in the for starting positions heading into a draft. I've mentioned this point so many times to kind of reference this and the deviation from their normal, from the trends that I see from them. Even when Kyle talked about it at the owners meetings, like heading into, I think it was the 2023 draft, they just needed one starting position, and it was kicker, right? That the draft where they took Jake Moody. Well, they also traded for a kicker ahead of the draft. They gave a 7th round pick for Zane Gonzalez to fill and plug that hole. Now, they still went and drafted the kicker, but when you went up and down the roster and you evaluated it, you're like, they at least have what appears to be a semblance of a starter at every position, or someone who could start. That's not the case this year. The defensive line currently is a shell of itself. They don't have Dre Greenlaw. D Winters, I think, has high upside, but still has a lot to prove and a lot to do from a consistency standpoint. And then everyone else, you got Curtis Robinson, who is a often injured player. He's a great teammate, great locker room guy, but they signed Luke Gifford, who's a journeyman special teamer who might be able to fill in a pinch, and Jalen Graham, who has upside but also raw as well. So you look at the defense and you're just like, man, this is the first time that they're heading into this draft with so many perceived holes for starters. And so that's why a trade up feels less likely. It feels like, if anything, this would be the draft to take as many shots on goal as possible, because as we know, the hit rate in the NFL, especially in the draft, it can be a crapshoot. I mean, just ask the San Francisco 49ers in 2021, 22, 23, right? Thankfully, they have, I think, restored some confidence in the fan base with how they drafted last year, coming away with Dominic Pooney, Renardo Green, you know, Ricky Pearsall is definitely a ascending player. So they've done good. And of course, Malik Mustafa, right? So they need that times two. It's like they need that draft, but multiplied by more. And so I'm of the mindset, like, I'm not going to be surprised if number 11 potentially becomes a maybe a prime trade back spot. I think back to the last couple of drafts. Maybe it was last year, or even like the year that I think Patrick Mahomes went at 11 in 2017. The Chiefs traded up to 11. 11 feels like a prime spot for anyone who really wants to go after a Shador Sanders, potentially a Jackson Dart. Does that? I mean, we'll see if they go that high, but I'm more of the mindset, man, trade back.
Yeah.
Get more top 100 picks, and cuz you never know. You just never know due to injury, you never know if guys are going to pan out or not. So that's kind of where I'm at. I would be really surprised if they did trade up.
No, I agreed. I think, as you've said there, Brad, that last year it was the first draft where we didn't seem to have an eye on next year. So as 49ers fans, we've headed into draft, we've been told, we're selecting this guy, maybe he's going to redshirt for a year. And, you mentioned Dominic Puny. He was straight away, you mentioned him quite early on. So when I was doing our podcast, I was like, well, Brad Graham's my offensive lineman. So on the 49er Faithful UK, we were referencing that because you were saying good stuff about him. So one of our faithful, there's a running joke at the moment. So I think if we took Scatterboo at number 11, the faithful would have a heart attack. Now, Nadji, who's one of my co-hosts, used to play running back. He wants us to take Scatterboo later on. He fell in love with him towards the end of last season, and you've probably seen the tweets. We're known for being light-hearted on this side of the pond. Now, I don't think we're taking him at 11, but I've seen a few of the talking heads seem to think Kyle is falling in love with Scatterboard. Do you think it's a sign that we could see, or do you think at the moment running back's just not something we should even be looking at, especially at 11? I know that much.
Well, 11, absolutely not. But I do think Scatterboo will be available in the second round. So I do think that could potentially be an option there. I'm kind of conflicted on if I think that Kyle likes Scatterboo or not, because when you look back at some of the wide or running backs that have had a lot of success, I mean, they have been typically burners. You think of the guy who maybe hasn't been a burner who has had success recently, and it's Jordan Mason. And it just felt like there was always something off with, and I don't know if that is a disconnect between Jordan Mason and Bobby Turner, or they obviously went to trade. They traded him away. So I would say Scatterboo reminds me more of a Jordan Mason type runner. I think Scatterboo's phenomenal. I think that he's not going to be a burner. He might be a 2-down back in the NFL. I mean, he can receive. I think it's really hard to put him in an NFL box because we focus so much on speed that he gets knocked for that, right? Because I think he ran like a 4.6 something. But I think he'll be a second round pick. I wouldn't be shocked if the 49ers took him, but exactly to kind of like Johnny's point, I think Kyle has proven that he likes a little bit more speed at the position, right? Now, it goes hand in hand. I mean, I look at TDP, I look at Trey Sermon, guys that the 49ers have drafted in the third round, and they're like not burners.
Yeah.
But they didn't work out, right, within that scheme. And so I don't know. I'm really conflicted because on one hand, I could be like, yeah, I could see Kyle liking Scatterboo because Scatterboo is a different type of back, in my opinion. Like he really is potentially going to be a special player. But it's like when you're running outside zone, you look at guys like Isaac Garendo,
Yeah.
who his skill set translates to outside zone. Being able to have vision, one cut go. I don't know, man. It's an interesting conversation to have, but I like Scatterboo personally. I honestly couldn't guess if he. So I'm gonna put it this way: Kyle either absolutely loves Cam Scatterboo or absolutely is not going to touch him with a 10-foot pole. So
So I think the reason for the conversation, Brad, is we do the mock drafts like you guys, and the only one I got right last year was Garendo. So each year, the 4 co-hosts in our show, we pick a player to watch. Garendo was my man last year. So I think Nadji's trying to speak Cam into existence. And I know you've made him very happy by saying you're a fan. Now, off air, we were talking about draft crushers. But before we go down there, I think somebody's asked you a super chat. So there's a question there, which you probably more qualified to answer this one for me. So thoughts on Charles Grant as Trent's replacement, possibly?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I have not watched Charles Grant. So I could give you a real-time scouting report on some clips that I'm seeing on Twitter right now. So he is a smaller school prospect. Currently, what I'm seeing right now is he looks like he has good movement skills. He kind of looks like a guard to me. He's 6'5", 311 pounds. He's got really long arms, 34 3/4 inches. He looks like he has good feet, decent feet, but first impression is his feet aren't super quick. So for me, he kind of reminds me of Spencer Burford. I'm not going to lie. Spencer Burford was playing tackle at UTSA. I watched Spencer Burford. I'm like, Spencer looks like a guard to me. Even though Spencer Burford did play tackle last year for the 49ers. Just based on this quick little glance, I've probably watched 15 plays now. He definitely strikes me as a guard. But I see why people have talking about him. I haven't done a full deep dive yet on him, but that is my first impression. Now that can change, obviously, once I do a deeper dive into the film, which I'm going to want to do. But based on what I'm seeing is he's got a decent vertical set in pass protection. Hands seem like to be solid. Quick notes on critiques are pad level and his hips look a little tight, which I would then consider to look at him as a guard in that standpoint. So to give you an idea of how I see this comment all the time, like you were mentioning arm length.
Yeah.
I don't use arm length as a determining factor of whether you're a guard or a tackle. I use base, feet, hips, all that. That's how I determine if you can play tackle because, yes, arm length will always keeping the guy away further from you as possible is definitely a benefit, but it's not an end-all be-all in my opinion. I think of Rashawn Slater, who's an all-pro tackle, who's 6'3" and has 33-inch long arms, which is considered that's like the last possible measurement that you typically want to be at for a tackle. So first impression on Charles Grant kind of looks like a guard to me, but we'll see how that goes once I do a deeper dive on him.
So I've added a name at your list. Johnny Dell, hadn't watched much on him either. And speak of the devil, Brad, Lee Gowland, he's supposed to be on his holidays, but he's put these at Heathrow Airport in London. Cheeky little live, because for full disclosure, I got home from work, wasn't sure whether Brad was available tonight. It was all a little bit kind of like messages back and forward. And then 10 minutes before we'd agreed, I was like, hi, Brad. Am I hosting? Are you hosting? So, Lee, it won't surprise you to hear that there was a little bit of disorganisation when you weren't here. But before we disappear down another rabbit hole, we mentioned pick 11. Now, Patrick Willis is forever renowned as the best number 11. And I'm not sure if you're aware, Brad, but we have Patrick Willis in common because he's been on my show the same as he's been on your show. And I have to admit, getting the phone call to say Patrick Willis is going to jump on the live, I got that phone call about an hour before we went live, and it was touch and go whether he was going to join us. And I thought he was going to come on for about 30 seconds. You know, I know he's a busy man. He had a lot to talk about. He ended up taking over the show and was on for about 45 minutes, and he was fielding questions and he was putting us on the spot. And I know he's a favourite of yours. I love the episode with you and Patrick. So I just wanted to kind of mention that he'd been on our show as well. So we have that in common.
I saw that. That was super cool. Dude, Patrick is so, I mean, as you probably saw firsthand, he is just a real legit, just cool person, right? Like we think of these football players sometimes as being above approach, and just like they're just these different beings. And it's like, when that's one of my favorite thing about doing player interviews is when you get them on and you're like, all right, you're just a chill guy, and we can just nerd out about football, nerd out about the 49ers. And that's exactly who Patrick is. He's super humble, super chill, and I love that. I love that he came on your show. I'm sure that was a big moment in channel history for you guys.
Oh, it was massive. I mean, I still remember when Nick Clark reached out in 2022 and said that the Niners were going to push big in the UK. And what that meant was, you know, they were going to fly people over. So the first watch party, we had Joe Nedney. He was awesome. That was up in Leeds because the Niners own Leeds United. Then the year after, they flew out Joe Staley. Obviously, he's an offensive lineman, Brad. You'll be happy to hear that Joe Staley was unbelievable. Again, the expectations of the UK faithful was we might get a bit of access to Joe. He might come and, you know, wave, disappear off into the VIP section. Joe was like, no. He stood in the middle of the watch party. We lost that game against the Cleveland Browns, but I'll forever remember scoring a touchdown and Joe Staley hugging me, high-fiving me. And also, Joe Staley being quite blown away that at the time I had 47 fantasy football teams, and he couldn't quite believe that I was managing 47 fantasy football teams being in the UK. And then you fast forward to Frank Gore being put into the Niners Hall of Fame on the Monday against the Jets. And then he flew over to London to watch the game with us. And I don't know if you saw my social media. Dancing with Frank Gore to Journey, Don't Stop Believing when we were losing in front of 500 UK faithful wasn't something that I had on my bingo card. And I thought, I'm not going to top that, Brad. And then 3 weeks later, Patrick Willis came on the show. So it was just amazing.
Dude, that's so cool to hear. And again, it just speaks to, like, you know, how important of a role that you and Lee and the rest of your team play, like, in the fan base, right? Like, I think, as I'm sure you are clearly cognizant of, and I think larger entities are starting to understand, it's like fan voices are huge. Fan voices are so big in connecting the fan base, right? There's obviously voices that maybe drive wedges in the fan base as well, but that's always going to be the case. And I just think that it's super cool when guys like you, who do it the right way and go about it because you just love the 49ers and you love connecting your community with what would be considered predominantly American sport. And it's super cool that you're able to be able to do those things with Staley. Staley, the absolute legend. And it doesn't surprise me one bit that he was in the middle of everyone, and hearing you know, Frank Gore coming over and being a great presence, and Patrick Willis. They're such great ambassadors of the team. So that makes me happy. You know what? I don't know if you saw, but I guess Miyoko was saying that it doesn't look like there will be a international game this year for the San Francisco 49ers. I was really hoping that there was going to be. And I was hoping it was going to be in the UK. I really wanted an excuse to get over the pond and watch a game over there. I really, really did. So I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of bummed. I was really hoping for that to happen.
So, yeah, Matt Miyoko, big favourite, but he did break my heart a little bit. This time last year, Brad, he was teasing out that the Niners were coming to London. So, for the fact that he's come out after the owners' meeting, and not only has he confirmed that the London game isn't happening this year, but it's going to be Mexico next year. Now, to be honest, we obviously are connected to the team. So, we hear little bits now and then. Last year, the Niners were offered the chance to come across as one of the home teams because we had the 9 home games and we turned that down. Now, when that happened, I was thinking, okay, because we are well established in the UK. The 49ers are one of the better fan bases. Obviously, the presence that we've got, we're starting to get bigger and bigger. Now, for my American friends watching, I forget sometimes, Brad, that when I tweet out, people may not understand I'm in the UK. So last year, when I was asking for a London game, I got a little bit of hate on social media because of the 5,000 miles, the traveling, the time. And I get it, because for you guys on the West Coast, I think if the Niners came to London, you're looking at like a 6 a.m., 7 a.m. start for you guys watching the game. And then obviously the 5,000 mile travel. I've done it once. I came out in 2023. And I'll be honest, I was bushwhacked for days after. But I kind of expected it not to happen. But I just want to say on record that I'm delighted for the Mexican faithful, because when we went out to the Arizona game as the road team, that looked amazing, Mexico. And I know there's a lot of the content creators saying that if you can get to Mexico, you've got to get there.
Yeah, I was so impressed with the show out in Mexico City from that particular game. And I was like contemplating, should I go to this game? And I was like, I'm really upset that I didn't go. And so that's why I was like, man, please have an overseas game, because I really want an excuse to get out and go cover the team abroad. And I've had to clarify as well. It's like I have my own selfish wants, and then of course you have what's best for the team. Is it best for the team to probably travel to the East Coast, play a game on the East, then fly overseas and then deal with that? It's like, okay, I can rationalize that. The 49ers are already at the top of the league every single year with the most miles traveled, right? It's always between 25 to 30,000 miles that they have to travel, being a West Coast team. So that's always a consideration. And adding, like you said, another, that 5,000 there, 5,000 back. So that's quite the task. I could understand that, but selfishly, I'm like, I don't care. Give us a game over there so I can have an excuse to go get out there. But if it's going to be in Mexico City next year, obviously that works for me, because I just got to go south. But yeah, I was hoping to get like a UK European game somewhere over there. I thought that would have been great.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were excited because there was the game in Germany. So the Colts have been announced. So what they do with the international series games, they tease the home teams out, and then we have to wait for the NFL fixtures to come out after the draft. Now, I didn't think the Colts game was realistic because I feel that might be a divisional game. I think it might be like the Colts Jets or something. So I was pinning my hopes on that Cleveland road game. And I'm glad Miyoko's come out now, Brad, and he's dashed those hopes, because I'd rather know, because like you, selfishly being based in the UK. So to bring it back to a story we talked off air, my fandom as a Niner began in 2012, and the Niners came out in 2013. But my little girl was only 6 months old at the time, and I'd only been watching the sport for less than a year. And I live in the northeast of England, so travelling to London isn't always easy. So I didn't go to that game. and it's always been a regret of mine. So I've been hoping for them to
So
come
you've been
back.
waiting for a long time.
I've been waiting. However, I did make it out to Levi's for the Buccaneers game in 2023, which obviously 40
Oh,
of the
that was
UK
a
faithful
great
flew out.
game.
It was a great game. So obviously we had Brock Purdy with the 75-yard bomb to Ayuk. We had the George. All the touchdowns were scored at our end because we were in the gold mine. So
Awesome.
I think it was quite ambitious for Nick Clark to fill the gold mine with the UK faithful chapter. So 40 of us crazy Brits, Swedes, Frenchmen, Danishmen flew across. I caught one of your teams in action. So I watched Cal versus Stanford
Oh,
on the
awesome.
Saturday. I was sat with 4 Cal Bears fans who were unbelievable. They couldn't get the head around that. Some crazy Englishman had flown 5,000 miles on the Friday. Was watching Cal Stanford Saturday, Niners Sunday, Warriors Monday, and then flying home on the Tuesday. They were like blown away by
That
that.
is a
But
phenomenal road trip. That is you did
oh,
it right.
it was unbelievable. But you told me off air that the reason I fell in love with the Niners, Colin Kaepernick, was your draft crush. Now that must have felt awesome because I felt pretty good last year when we drafted Gorendo after I'd kind of taken one for the team this side and done the deep dive. But Colin Kaepernick is the reason I'm a Niners fan. And I know that's controversial amongst some of the fan base, but you can see the picture behind me. And that game, as I said to you, I worked with a Bears fan and we played the Monday Night Football. And that was my first live Niners game. That was at 1 a.m. And I'd never watched a game of American football before. I didn't understand what a first down was. I didn't understand what sacking the quarterback meant. But the next day, I walked into work with a Niners cap. And my friend was like, "You're hooked." And I said to you, I've never missed a game since, Brad.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I love those kinds of stories, right? Like the things that we look back at that hooked us. And like we were talking about off air, I got into the draft right after I was done playing college football because this my thought process was, believe it or not, when I was playing college football, I was not watching 49ers football. All my football energy was going into playing the game, training, working out, and doing all of that throughout the week. That watching other teams play football just wasn't on my radar. It doesn't mean I didn't grow up being a 49er fan, but when I was playing, I was just locked in on doing my job and getting better. And so I had no other energy for anything else. So when I got done playing football, I was sitting there like, well, I learned all this stuff about football. I learned how to play it, being able to play it in college. I'm like, what to do with all this now, what almost feels like useless knowledge? Like, am I going to coach? I've always thought about being an evaluator, like, but I have zero idea of how to do that. And honestly, like, that's when the change happened with Harbaugh coming in and taking over, and that was right when I was done playing football. So I took all that energy that was just kind of sitting there and I plugged it into the 49ers. And that's when I started following every offseason move, following free agency. And then I was like, you know what, let's try a little draft evaluation. Like, let's see what happens. One of my it actually started with Mike Upati. I actually have his jersey over here. They drafted him out of Idaho in the first round. I bought his jersey. I'm like, because it was so electric. The feeling of like being like, this guy, I think, is going to be a phenomenal player, just based on what I'm looking at. And then your team takes him. I was hooked. But that took that energy into the following year, and I kind of doubled down. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this even more now. And Colin Kaepernick was my first, like, and if you guys have followed my content and you follow like anything that I've done with pre-draft, I can get a little rambunctious when it comes to a draft crush. Some think of Brian Burns. George Kittle for me was a huge draft crush where I'm almost borderline obnoxious with how much I'm like, this guy's going to be good. You guys are dumb if you think he's not. So I go all in. Like if I fully believe in someone, I stand 10 toes down and I say this guy's going to be legit. And Colin Kaepernick, that was the year I didn't know if the 49ers were going to draft a quarterback, but this kid out of Nevada, over 10,000 yards passing over 4 years, 4,000 yards rushing. I'm like, this dude looks special. Like he has a cannon. He can run. It looks like he can make every single throw. So I was obnoxiously like banging the table. The 49ers need to draft Colin Kaepernick. And when they drafted him, it was like, it was like insane. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. The rush that you get when I don't want to say go out on a limb, Paul, because I think you might, like you were talking about with Garendo. It's like when you believe, you're going to receive
Yeah.
people who don't believe. They're going to be like, oh, he played in the pistol offense. He's not going to translate to the NFL. Like, it's not going to work. Like, so you get people who push back against your evaluation, and it almost makes you like dig in even more. And so you have almost like a personal connection built through that evaluation. Like, I believe in this guy. Like, I'm putting my, I didn't even have a reputation. I'm putting my belief on the line that I really do believe this guy is going to be special. And so when the 49ers drafted him, it was like, oh, they took the guy that I really wanted them to take. And I really do believe that moment really kind of galvanized like my love for evaluation. Like it's a rush. Like it's a rush. Like when the team takes the guy that you like, because it goes both ways. Like there's plenty of times the teams have passed on the guy that I like, and that is heartbreaking. And then when you see them go become all pros on other teams, and you're like, he was right there for us to take, and we passed for a bust. It's like, oh, but I think again, it's all part of the process, and it makes it so sweet when they do take your guy. And it's a fun feeling. I've had the 49ers take guys that I love, like Kittle, who have exceeded expectation. And then I've also had guys where they've taken and they've completely flamed out, and just like Quentin Patton. I loved Quentin Patton. And I was so excited when the 49ers took him, and they just never used him. And unfortunately, he got hurt, I think, his rookie year, and then just really never got a great opportunity. And sometimes that's what it comes down to. Some guys just needing an opportunity to get on the field. As we know, the 49ers offense wasn't predicated on running, 3 wide receiver sets. You had Crabtree, you had the other guys, Anquan Bolden. So it's like there was no room for that third wide receiver, because you had Vernon Davis, you had Delaney Walker, you had Bruce Miller, you had Frank Gore. It's hard to take those guys off the field. So it's all a lot of fun. And the hits are definitely more rare.
Yeah.
But when they hit, like I think what Johnny said, it's like a drug. It's like a complete adrenaline rush when one of your guys, that's why we call them my guys or draft crushes. When they get selected, you're like, to your favorite team, you're like, oh yeah, this is hyped. I'm so excited.
So, I mean, for me, I'm quite excited that I don't have a college football team. And I know one of your SDS members dropped your Discord link. So, to be honest with you, Brad, won't surprise, I'm a member of your Discord group. Now, we have our own Discord group because watching the Niners in the UK can sometimes be a lonely existence, especially if it's a 1 a.m. primetime game. So we do this thing every week where we have what's called a game day thread. So we're all sat at home. We're all trying to be quiet because the wives are in bed and the kids are sleeping. And we go crazy on our Discord thread. And the reason I wanted to reference with Kaepernick is because obviously the big question at the moment for Niners fans is the quarterback. It seems every year there's quarterback conversations. Now, Kaepernick was my first jersey. I then fell in love with Jimmy G. I don't mind admitting I went all in on Jimmy. Brock Purdy, I have to admit, Lee and Najee were at the draft in Vegas because if you cast your mind back, Lee Gowland announced the Sammy Womack pick earlier that day. Funny fact,
awesome.
Sky Sports, who's our cable network over here, didn't show Lee making the draft pick to 500 million people because they decided to go to a commercial break. So we were all sat in the UK waiting to see Lee on stage because they went to commercial break. And then later that day, I think Lee and Najee were saying the Niners are going to take a quarterback. And when we took Brock, we kind of have a bit of a special connection to him because Lee and Najee were there. And Lee was at Levi's for the game where Jimmy got injured and Brock started. So obviously there's a lot of talk at the moment because it's the off-season, contracts, numbers, money. We haven't talked too much about it on our channel. Is it something you've tried to stay away from, or do you just think it's one of the cases it's going to get done?
It's definitely something that I try not to talk about, but obviously certain things will spark that, whether it's, the recent owners meetings and the comments that are made surrounding it. So I think over the years, if you're a 49er fan, or at least a 49ers content creator, you've almost had to become well versed in contract negotiations. Like you've really had to wrap your head around it because that is a huge part of the off-season conversation, and it's for better or for worse. Obviously, it's a great problem to have that you have such great players that you need to pay, but obviously, there tends to be a method to the madness that I think can stress outsiders out when they're constantly having to talk about it. There's constantly this being said, that being said, they're this far off, this thing happened, that social media got wiped. It's just like, oh, it becomes exhausting. Like, I'll never forget, like, when I broke the Deebo Samuel trade news while on live back in that 2022 offseason, because when we were doing a live, and that was when Deebo had scrubbed his whole social media, unfollowed the Niners. Someone in the comments was like, Brad, did you see his brother commenting on your Facebook page? And I was like, no, what did he say? He's like, well, sent me a link. He's like, go look at it. And it's his brother saying, oh, like talking trash to a fan and being like, oh, it doesn't matter. We're getting traded. Well, he's getting traded out of here. We're not going to be here. I'm like, oh, and I remember taking a screenshot of it, putting the post together on live, hitting send on the tweet, and watching the retweets just pile. It was crazy. So we're on live watching this thing go viral in real time. And then that very next morning is when Jeff Darlington came out and said Deebo Samuel has officially requested a trade. So there's just so much wild things that happen when it comes to players being in a negotiation, and obviously the quarterback being in the negotiation makes it much more high profile. I just hope it gets done before OTAs and mandatory minicamp. That's just really where I'm at. I don't expect them to be close early in the process. From everything that I've learned about the negotiation process with the 49ers specifically, is they don't tend to start very close, and it's a process to close that gap. So based on my read of the outside looking in, it just feels like they're in the middle of that. There's that gap right now, and it's who's going to cross that line or who's going to push that gap closer together to a point where both sides feel comfortable to get it done. I would be shocked if Brock Purdy is not the quarterback moving forward for the next three years at minimum. So obviously there might be some bumps in the road to get to that deal, which seems to be pretty standard operating procedure. But I'm still fairly confident that it's going to get done, because it just doesn't feel like the 49ers would be in a great spot drafting another quarterback, expecting him to be the starter, going somewhere else. I don't know. It just feels like they should get it done. But of course, anything can happen in this league, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, don't worry, Faithful. We're not going to transition into quarterback talk. I wanted to bring it back before I touch on to some super chats that will want your opinion. So you mentioned George Kittle being one of your draft crushes. So I'm not sure if you've seen. So obviously the world went into lockdown, which meant we couldn't have our usual UK watch parties. And then when the world came out of lockdown, it was the year the Niners released the 94 red throwbacks with the 75 badge on. So in the UK, Brad, it's expensive to get merch, but we love our merch, as you can see by my background. And when those jerseys were released, everybody in the UK thought they were being clever by buying a Kittle 85 jersey. They were future-proofing it. Kittle was going nowhere. So we rocked up at our watch party after COVID, and every single person had a Kittle 85 jersey on. So we do what we do best on this side of the pond. We all pause with our flag, and we tagged George in it, and we nicknamed it Club 85. So you referenced about your social media going crazy. When George retweeted that, I run the social media off my phone, much to the delight of my good lady. So waking up the next morning to lots and lots of interactions. And then I don't know if you saw last year, Lee sent one of our flags out to George, and he posed for a photo with our flag. So at the moment, we've got quite a good record. We've got Brock with a flag. We've got Kittle with a flag. And we've got a few of the content creators rocking the flag. So we're doing all right, Brad. We're doing all right when it comes to things like that. But as I said, there's a couple of super chats. So the first one, is we've been asked, do we reckon Guerrero could fill that Debo hybrid role? Do you think that's something we're not going to look at? Or?
Well, I guess from the running back perspective, that would make sense. I don't necessarily see Isaac Guerrero splitting out like into the slot and like running routes from that perspective. I kind of think that Isaac Guerrero fits that Raheem Mostert role that the 49ers haven't had since Raheem Mostert left. Just a true outside zone threat and a guy who can spread defenses horizontally. And then when he picks and finds his running lane, he's upfield vertically in a hurry. That's kind of where I see Isaac Guerrero presenting the most impact. To me, he's still more of a like a legit running back. I don't necessarily see him as a receiving threat. Doesn't mean he can't be a receiving threat. But if you want to use him in, jet sweeps, pre-snap motions, moving across the formation, that stuff, you could absolutely do that. And maybe Kyle does get creative when you have Christian McCaffrey on the field, and maybe you put Guerrero in that role potentially to just kind of get defenses trying to figure out what they're doing. If anything, I would potentially maybe see Christian more in a hybrid role, because he's just such a phenomenal pass catching wide receiver that he could be a wide receiver. You could definitely line CMC in the slot and have him run routes. So that could be an option as well.
So one of my favorite CMC stories, I subscribe to lots of the US-based subscriptions out there to get my news. And when we traded for CMC, apparently it was quite late for him to join the team against the Chiefs. So back then, Brock Purdy was third string. And apparently Brock was drafted in to run through some of the playbook. And CMC was saying how cool it was that this guy, who he didn't really know who he was telling him where to line up, his command of the playbook back then. And CMC scored my first ever live touchdown at Levi Stadium. So he will forever hold a place in my heart. But the last super chat is more of a statement than a question, and I can answer this one. So Silent said there that one of his favourite games was the redemption game versus the Saints, which I've watched back. I didn't watch live at the time because I wasn't really, my Niners journey started after that. But there wasn't a UK watch party because the fan chapter was just kind of developing back then. But that was a pretty special game, wasn't it, Brad, for 49ers fans?
I mean, I'll never forget where I was when that game happened. It was one of my favorite days ever because I'm a big snowboarder. So I was in Tahoe. I was able to go do a half day on the mountain, woke up early, got in. I was wearing my Mike Iupati jersey on the mountain. So I was loving it. I was going up and down the mountain, rocking the Upati jersey. And then I came home, got back in time. I think it was probably like a 1 p.m. start time. And then just watched the game. And it was one of the most insane games I've still to this day ever witnessed. And that will just forever be burned into my memory. Just the feeling that I had in that moment, and the intensity of that game. So you probably can recall the 2019 game against the Seattle Seahawks, the final game of the year, the Dre Greenlaw stop, and the emotions that came along with that game, right? To me, it was very similar, like just back and forth, coming down to the last play. Obviously, it was roles reversed, offense, defense, but same emotions, just like, oh my gosh. Like, obviously, it wasn't a elimination game against Seattle, but there's still a lot on the line. It was first seed. It was still a very, very meaningful game. And so that's kind of what it was just pure emotions. And when Vernon scored that, you're going through so many different emotions. Like, oh my gosh, are we going to lose this game? Are we going to get bounced out of the playoffs? And for them to win it again, it's just, it's emblematic of life as a 49er fan. I think just one giant roller coaster ride, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of twists and turns, right?
So to answer his question a different way, so you're probably aware that the Niners are linked to buying Glasgow Rangers. So what we tend to do in the UK before Nick Clark came along, we would see the fixture list, we would pick a 6 o'clock game because that's a sweet spot for us on a Sunday, and we would pick a host city and we would move it around the UK. So the 2019 season you're referencing there, can remember the Saints game where George Kittle had 5 people draped all over him? It was it 48-46? That was our UK watch party game up in Scotland. And I'll never forget walking into a bar in Edinburgh, Brad, and it was a Rangers Celtic game was on in the afternoon. And they were all looking at these crazy Brits in red and gold. What are you guys here for? We were like, we're here for the 49ers game. Now, that game for us, there was a couple from the States who were big Saints fans who were honeymooning, and they'd reached out to the fan chapter and said, is there anywhere in Edinburgh to watch the game? We said, yeah, there's going to be about 30 to 40 of us. Come and join us. And Lee Gowland, who's in the chat, is going to hate me for this, but you will like the story. So the reason Lee Gowland is called El Presidente is because when they first walked into the sports bar, they introduced themselves and asked if Lee was the president of the group, which, as you can imagine, we'd all had a few drinks. We were all spirits. So the nickname stuck. But that for us was when the fan chapter kind of exploded because that game was unbelievable. And I think the Niners tweeted out a reaction around the world after that game. And I'm pretty sure we made the video in some shape or form. So like Ty Olsen said there, we all have our memories. Now, I know I've kept you for an hour, Brad. So I am really appreciative of your time. There is one more super chat that's coming. You might know what this means more than me. So I'll put it on the screen. I'll let you respond.
Is CMC Bosch?
I didn't know whether that was something I'm missing in translation. He's good, if that's what you mean. And I love CMC. So
CMC back? I'm not sure what the emphasis on the question is. If you're still in the chat, feel free to clarify. I'm gonna pretend like you're saying, is CMC back? if that is the case, I would say that CMC, I think from everything that we've heard, is healthy and should be good to go. So I'm expecting a big time bounce back from Christian McCaffrey. I'm expecting a very angry Christian, a very angry, focused Christian McCaffrey. I think as long, again, we're going to knock on wood, as long as he's healthy, I would expect a monster season from him.
So, do you have any final thoughts, Brad, before I let you get back to your day? Because I do appreciate that you've joined me short notice on a Friday. As I said, I'm a big fan of yours. If you're watching and you're not subscribed to Brad's channel, you need to subscribe. You need to follow on social media. But do you have any final thoughts, Brad, for the UK faithful that might be watching?
Just appreciate everyone's support. You know, guys like you, Paul, who, you know, drop into the chat. And, you know, again, like, I don't think football needs to be more stressful than it needs to be. And I think a lot of people tend to focus on the stress elements of it. And so I appreciate guys like you who can look at the game through an optimistic lens, talk about, you know, obviously everything isn't going to be perfect. There are going to be ups and downs, and, you know, being able to talk about that like the world isn't coming to an end, I think is actually a skill. So I appreciate guys like you. And of course, I appreciate all the UK faithful who check into the shows, you know, when we do our roll calls of like, where are you watching from? Everyone who taps in. Again, it's just super cool. And I appreciate that we're finally able to get this stream going, and it definitely shouldn't be the last. I've enjoyed our conversation. It's been an easy stream, and I really do appreciate you banging down the door to make sure that you could lock me down and get this thing done. You deserve a lot of credit for that, and I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Obviously, you're more than welcome to appear. I know in season you're very busy. And as I said, I would like people who are watching who may not know who the UK faithful are, if you could drop us a like, a subscribe.
Yeah,
we are slowly starting on this journey, Brad. We've got a long way to go, but we're keen to improve our knowledge. Red Jet Shell will be joining me on next week's live show, which another American joining me, Brad, to talk about our connection. So I'm trying to kind of make the bridge across the pond, for want of a better word. But as you said, Brad, it's been a blast to have you on. So thank you for joining me, and hopefully it won't be so long next time. And all that is left for me to say is trust the process and go Niners.
Appreciate it, man.
We love the San Francisco 49ers deep in our heart, like Joe Montana in the corner, Detroit.